the last thing we did was Perek Chafal Pasuk Yud Aleph. We were talking about the Aron Kodesh and the rings. And the rings are, we said the rings are the endless, symbolize the endless reward. Where are we here? Not in Mishpatim, I'm sorry, in Truma. Truma Chaf. Oh, my messed up. Wow. Chaf Hey. I have written over here Chaf Aleph. Chaf Hey. This should be. Chaf Hey Yud Beis. 2512. What page is it? Okay. Page 446. So it says, Pasuk 12, Pasuk Yud Beis, 5 lines of W. Yitzakta lo arba tavo zahav. That was the four rings. Then it says like this, Pasuk Yud Gimel, 4 lines from the bottom. And Atzi asked me about this yesterday. Vesisa bade atze shitim. You should make poles out of shitim wood. Vitzipisa osam zahav. And you should make them out of gold. Now, if you take a look at the picture, those are the poles that they carry the Aron Kodesh with. There's only one problem here. If you make a calculation of how much this box and inner box weighed, and you're going to carry that with 2 wooden poles, right? Two wooden poles are not going to lift an Aron Kodesh. The weight, the weight alone. So that's why we have the statement in the Gemara that the Aron was nosei es nosav. The Aron carried those that carried it. It means it looked like they were carrying the Aron Kodesh. The Aron Kodesh really carried them. So you hold on. I guess it was pretty cool to be one of the guys who held the poles, because it looked like your feet were on the ground and really the Aron was carrying you. You went for a ride. The Aron carried it. There's a lot of funny things about this Aron Kodesh. One of the funny things it says is that it did not take up space in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the Holy of Holies. You got a box the size of this table. From that wall to that wall is 20 amos. And if you measure from this wall to here and from that wall to here, so then you should measure about 8.5 amos, right? Yet if you did, it would measure 10 amos from there and 10 amos to here. But the whole place wall to wall is 20. So Gemara says the Aron did not take up space in the Holy of Holies. That's pretty beyond our comprehension. It's beyond our comprehension what that means. All we know is what it means is that you could have something in the physical world that is so spiritual, so ruchti, that it doesn't take up space in the physical world. Right? So it's an interesting concept. Not only that, it says that the Aron Kodesh, and this we do have a way of at least relating to, if you've ever seen Star Trek, which I don't believe any of you haven't, right? I'm assuming you've seen Star Trek. There's a statement that the Aron, when they crossed into Eretz Yisrael with Yehoshua, the Leviim, the Kohanim, or the Leviim were holding their Aron Kodesh. They walked into the Jordan River and it split. The Jewish people crossed the Jordan River into the land of Israel, and the indication of the Nach is that they went back to the west bank. No, to the east bank, to the occupied east bank. They went back to the occupied east bank. Then the next thing we find in the Nach is that they were with the Jewish people, the Kohanim holding. In other words, they went in, split, and then went right back where they came from with the Aron Kodesh. The next thing you find in the Nach is that they were joined up with the Jewish people. So the way the Gemara puts it, the Aron was wherever it had to be. How did it get there? The answer is it was where it had to be. That means it was beamed across.
I put on the microphone.
Oh, yes, technical. Sorry about that. You didn't miss anything. I was just talking about how to make a lot of money quickly, and he's like, "Don't worry about it." The Aron was where it had. Ron, you could have interrupted me for that. That wouldn't have been that way. He's so polite and proper. He just waited till I paused to tell me. You could have just said, but put on the microphone, dork. Right? Yeah. If there was a $20 bill on the floor, Ron, I'd expect you to interrupt me mid-sentence and say, "Pick it up. There's a $20 bill there." So feel free, or anyone else, as a matter of fact. So the Aron was, we in Star Trek they used to beam people down. Right? You ever say, "Beam me down, Scotty"? Right? They'd beam them down. As a kid, you just figure, yeah, you could do that. We could do that. So apparently the Aron, there's certain things that transcend the physical limitations. That's what the Aron Kodesh was. A very, very, very concept beyond our comprehension. Now, the idea here is, if you take a look, now let's go. So you put in these beams to carry the Aron Kodesh. Let's say so. Then it says like this: Bitabos, 2 lines from the bottom. Stay with this. Bitabos ha'aron yuabadim. These poles should be in the Aron Kodesh. Lo yasuru mimeno. They must not be removed, and it is actually one of the prohibitions of the Torah. This is listed as one of the 365 lavs of the Torah. You are not allowed to pull the poles out of the Aron Kodesh. That's why somebody who takes the poles out of the Aron Kodesh is over on a lav, no different than wearing shatnez or eating chazer. You've transgressed. You're over on a lav. That means if you're ever walking past the Beis Hamikdash and you get this overwhelming urge, I got to get in there and rip those poles out of the Aron Kodesh. Don't do it. Restrain yourself. Get somebody to hold you back, right? This is one of my weaknesses in life. Seafood. What do you call it? What's it called? Those I forgot what they're called with the little tentacles. No, that's squid. Lobster. Yeah, those are my lobster and the poles of the Aron Kodesh. Those are my weaknesses. Somebody hold me back. So yeah, who's going to go take the poles out of the Aron Kodesh? What is it? Why is the Torah telling you to do that? So obviously, it's referring to those who are carrying the Aron Kodesh, and you'll notice that the poles had a little bulb at the end, so that they didn't come out. There was a bulb. I don't know how they inserted them. Doesn't say. But there's like a little bulb at the end so that they don't come out of the rings. Now, the symbolism here is, first of all, Rav Hirsch says that what happens if there's under threat, the Beis Hamikdash is under threat. The Torah is communicating the idea that one day you may have to run off with the Aron Kodesh. And that if you're running off with the Aron Kodesh, don't start fiddling with the beams have to be there, ready to transport it. What that means is, because it says when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the Aron Kodesh was actually hidden in the deep inner recesses under the Temple Mount. King Yoshio hid the Aron Kodesh. He knew the Beis Hamikdash was going to be destroyed, so he actually hid the Aron Kodesh. But at the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, it wasn't even there. The time of the second Beis Hamikdash, when the Kohen Gadol went in, what did he sprinkle on when he sprinkled the blood on Yom Kippur? Instead of sprinkling it by the Aron Kodesh, what did he sprinkle it on? In the Holy of Holies, there was what's called the Even Shesiyah, the foundation stone of the world. King Yoshio, at the first Beis Hamikdash, when he knew the Beis Hamikdash would be destroyed, so one opinion in the Gemara is there were some sort of hidden spaces under the Beis Hamikdash, and somehow he hid the Aron Kodesh. Don't go looking for it; you won't find it. That is the one opinion. Now, what's the Torah telling you when you grab the Aron Kodesh and go running with it? What does that mean? Rav Hirsch says what that means is it's teaching us, and the poles are attached to it, that one day Torah may have to leave. That means Torah may have to go to Chutz La'aretz. And it did. It went to Babylonia. Not literally the Aron Kodesh, even though there is one opinion in Gemara that says it did, but that's not the opinion. The standard opinion is King Yoshio hid it. But that means the Torah itself may go. What the Torah is teaching you is that we spoke about this when the Jewish people received. Why did Klal Yisrael receive the Torah 2 week parshas ago? Why did they receive the Torah in the desert? It would have been so much more Hollywood. Go to Eretz Yisrael, build a Beis Hamikdash, and right there with this magnificent structure, have a Torah being given. Right? Wouldn't that have been? It would have been so much more Hollywood. Instead, they're out in the desert. And that's where HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives the Torah. Why is the Torah given in the Ten Commandments? The Torah is given revelation is in the desert. Why is that? The answer is because Torah is not limited to Eretz Yisrael. Torah is not limited to Eretz Yisrael, and Torah is going to be wherever we go. Eretz Yisrael is not a prerequisite for Torah. Torah is a prerequisite for Eretz Yisrael. The idea that Jews should live in Israel without Torah law is anti-Torah. No such thing. No such thing. The Torah itself says that the land of Israel will spew us out if we're not obedient to the Torah. We are not a nation, I told you, we've mentioned this in the past, we are not a nation like any other nation. If you're from Ireland, you're Irish. And if you're from Italy, you're Italian. And if you're from Indonesia, you're Indonesian. Right? If you're from where are you Jewish? Good question, huh? From where are you Jewish? If you're from Israel, you're not Jewish. If you're from Israel, they call you an Israeli. That's why you see that the anti-Semites in the world are constantly using them interchangeably, Israels and Jews. Right? Israel does something wrong, so the Jews in South America are picked on. What's one thing got to do with the other? That's Israel. Those are Israelis. Those are Jews in Argentina. What's one thing got to do with the other? The answer is the world sees it interchangeable. Israel is Jews. Israel is Jews. Call yourself an Israeli, call yourself what you will, you're Jewish. And it's the Jew that they're after. We're a nation because of Torah. We're not a nation because of a location, a physical location. That brings us to the question of, is it a mitzvah to live in Israel? Is it a mitzvah to live in Israel? Where does Israel fit in? And you guys have all heard about Zionism and anti-Zionists, and then you have the extreme anti-Zionists, you have the Neturei Karta, you have, the Satmar, and you have the middle-of-the-road Zionists, you have the religious Zionists, or Zionists. Where does all this fit in over here? The answer is it a mitzvah to live in Israel? And what does Israel fit in? Rav Dessler says, it is a mitzvah to live in Israel. It's a mitzvah to live in Israel. Is it a mitzvah to shecht an animal?
Yeah.
Did you shecht this morning? Did you put on tefillin this morning?
Yeah.
Did you shecht?
Not yet.
Why not? Oh, not yet, huh? Give me a time, Jake. Give me a time for this, because this I gotta see. Not yet, he tells me. Not yet. Yeah, I know. Not yet. Yeah, not this decade. Yeah, I know what not yet means. Yeah, not yet. Why didn't you shecht? So we've mentioned in the past there are two types of mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah chiyuvis and a mitzvah kiyumis. Mitzvah chiyuvis is that your mandatory mitzvah. You got to put on tefillin. You got to put a mitzvah on the door. That's a mitzvah chiyuvis. Mitzvah kiyumis is if you want to eat kosher meat, you have to shecht an animal. You have to shecht it. And when you shecht it, you make a bracha. Because Kodesh Baruch Hu told us how to shecht. And that we have to shecht if you want to eat meat. You don't have to eat meat. You don't have to eat meat, certainly not now. If you want to eat meat for Yontif, you're going to have to make sure the animal is shechted. That's a mitzvah kiyumis. When you do the mitzvah, then you have to make the bracha and you have to fulfill the mitzvah properly. You don't have to do it. You don't have to do it. You have to put on tefillin. And you have to put up a mitzvah and you have to wear tzitzis. When it comes to living in Eretz Yisrael, Reb Moshe Feinstein was very frum. Very frum. Right? Yet he didn't live in Eretz Yisrael. And he could have. Rav Aaron Kotler could have lived in Eretz Yisrael. A lot of Gedolim today who live in America could have lived in Eretz Yisrael. Why don't they? The answer is because Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah kiyumis. When you live here, you're fulfilling a mitzvah. You're not obligated to. Number one. Number two, and perhaps even more importantly, the way Rav Dessler puts it, Eretz Yisrael is one of the best and finest tools that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us in order to fulfill our purpose as Torah Jews, which is to grow as a Torah Jew. If Eretz Yisrael is a good way for you to grow, you should live in Eretz Yisrael. If living in Pittsburgh is a good way for you to grow, then you should live in Pittsburgh. But it's not that Eretz Yisrael is not an ends in and of itself, which is where we part company with the movement, with the Zionist movements. The religious Zionists, the secular Zionists, we part company long before that. But the religious Zionist movement, which makes living in Israel possibly the most important mitzvah in the Torah, right? There's no such thing. No such thing. To be a Zionist means you've taken, first of all, Zion, just as a point of correction, do you know where Tzion is? The Temple Mount is Tzion, because we say Tzion of Yerushalayim. So even calling people who want to live in Israel Zionists is not accurate. Zionists would mean everybody living on the Temple Mount. right? Which you can't do because nowadays to go on a temple, you're liable for premature death for the Koretz penalty. So they really call themselves Israelists. But okay, we'll call it Zionists. There's no such thing as taking one mitzvah. You know what we are? Jake and I for sure, we're the Tefillinists, right? It's the Tefillinist movement, right? The Tzitzisist movement, right? The Shatnesist movement. You know, there's no such thing. We got to do it all. Do you live in Israel or not? You live in Israel if it can help you. If it's best for your growth, that means you've taken in factors such as Torah study, finances, finding a job, family, all factors taken together, and then you've determined it's best for me as a Jew to grow and live in Israel, then you go live in Israel. If it's best for me as a Jew to live in Kansas City, then you go to Kansas City, because you go where it is best for you to go. That is where it fits in. It is what Rav Dessler calls a tool for growth. It's not an ends in and of itself. And the religious Zionist movement, for a great extent, that's where we part company. They make it almost an ends in and of itself. That's the difference. Now, the first thing Rav Hirsch says is that the Poles demonstrate never take them out of the Aron Kodesh, because you might have to you might have to run away with the Aron Kodesh. Symbolically, Torah might go out into Golus. Torah might go into exile, which it did, which is why we're studying Talmud Bavli. What does Talmud Bavli tell you, gentlemen? It was compiled in Bavel. You know, all of our Torah Shabbal Peh that we're spending the last couple thousand years is Babylonian Talmud. There was Jerusalem Talmud, but the focus of our attention is the Talmud Bavli. Therefore, the Torah is telling you that, number one, that's a symbolism. Number two is that what do Poles do for the Aron Kodesh, theoretically?
They hold it up.
They hold it up. And therefore, the Torah is telling you that the Poles must never be removed from the Aron Kodesh symbolically, never remove support of Torah. Never remove support. There are two people. There are those who learn and there are those who support learning. The Torah said, well, a guy here at Or Sameach once suggested, by the way, very interesting, he suggested that the Poles, which are not an inherent part of the Aron Kodesh, they're only added on after the Aron Kodesh is there, the Poles represent the rabbinic laws that were added on later. A very, very creative, very interesting idea, that the Poles represent, and don't separate the Poles from the Aron Kodesh, because the idea that rabbinic law is optional is just that. It's an idea, and it's a bad idea, because it is not optional. Sometimes people say, well, it's only d'Rabbanan. Right? Well, yeah. Well, it's only a white flame, not a blue flame. You know, Gehenna. Right? It's not. You know, there's Gehenna for Rabbanan also, and you could get flogged for violating a rabbinic law. And not only you get flogged for violating rabbinic law, you get more than 39. Like we were learning the Gemara for D'Oraisa, you're limited to 39. For rabbinic law, they could whip you as much as they feel necessary, right, to make sure they get your cooperation. Are you going to do it? I don't think so. Whap. Right? Now, what about now? Well, I'm considering. Whap. Right? What about now? Yes, I'll do it. Good. Whap. What was that for? Right? I don't want you to have any second thoughts. Right? Whap. What was that for? That was for asking the question, and now you get another one. Whap. So the possibilities are endless. And therefore, rabbinic law is mandatory, and it's telling you that those who have the money, make sure you've got the money to do the right thing. Support Torah. And a man could have a lot of money, and he could have olam haba by supporting Torah. So a very wealthy man once said to Rav Steinman, he said, what do we need so many kolos for? Why do we need so many kolos? I mean, you got a lot of guys learning Torah, they're married. Why do we need so many kolos for? So Rav Steinman said to him, what do we need so many wealthy men for? Right? Nowadays, you got a lot of wealthy Jews. Never had a situation like this. Everywhere you go, there's certain kind of wealthy Jews who are billionaires from Jews, billionaires, hundreds of millions of dollars. What do you need so many wealthy men for? The guy said, what do you mean? The statement said, well, you think it's because they're wealthy men, that's why we have kolos. Right? But what comes first, the chicken or the kolo? Right? We have kolos, that's why we have wealthy men. He said, I'll tell you what, maybe we won't have any kolos anymore. And if we cut down on the kolos, we'll cut down on the wealthy men. Maybe you'll be one of them. No. How much do you want, Rabbi? just name the price. Right? And that's the attitude. And that's what it means that the Aron Kodesh carried those that carried it. The Aron Kodesh carried those that carried it. Who's carrying who? When the wealthy men give money to the kolo, who's carrying who? it looks like they are the ones carrying the kollel, where the fact is that the people learning Torah are the ones carrying the donors. The trick is convincing the donor of that. That's the successful fundraisers, the ones who actually convince the donor that we're carrying you. Because sometimes the sales, I've never done it, Baruch Hashem. I'm not a fundraiser. But the pitch is, I'm doing you a favor by allowing you to support Torah, which unfortunately is sometimes met with the response of, don't do me any favors, right? But that's, if you, from the Torah perspective, is why do they have money? They have money, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, well, and Torah needs to be supported. Torah needs to be supported, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu has blessed people with money. Those who support Torah have the schus of the learning. And therefore, it's telling you that the poles must never be taken out of the Aron Kodesh. Number 3, the Gemara says that if you would walk into the Beis HaMikdash and you saw the curtain in the Kodesh, the curtain that separates from the Kodesh to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, if you look at this curtain, you would see a protrusion at the top, which is the 2 poles pressing against the curtain, which looks like the top part of a female's anatomy. Isn't that interesting? The poles pressing against the curtain looks like the top part of the female, the upper part of the female's anatomy. Nothing better to compare it to? You have nothing better to compare it to than something that a man's not supposed to be looking at? That's what the Gemara compares it to. You understand that every word of Chazal is measured, and Chazal say it looks like the top of a woman's anatomy. That's why Chazal are comparing it. What do you think that means? What do you think that means? Why that? And why are the poles, to the guy, why have the poles press against it like that? What's the point? It's obviously a reminder. What's the reminder? Twofold. Number 1, the top part of a woman's anatomy is what provides a baby with his most basic nourishment. The most basic nourishment for Klal Yisrael is Torah. The Aron Kodesh represents Torah, the most basic part of Klal Yisrael. What really nourishes us, what gives us our health, what gives us our ruchni health, what gives us any health, is the fact that we have the Torah, which is in the Aron Kodesh, number 1. And number 2, the Gemara says that a child, whenever he needs to nurse, so his mother's available for him to nurse, and he has any taste, whatever his mother eats, that's what the child tastes. Person who learns Torah, there's always something new. It's always available, and there's always something new. By the way, that's one of the reasons why Torah is compared to a fig tree. What's the difference between a fig tree and all other trees? And don't tell me that it grows figs, right? That's like Toso saying, Ike beinayu. Yeah, that's saying, my beinayu, Ike beinayu, it grows figs. I know that. Yeah. What else is the difference between? There's a very distinct difference between fig trees and other trees.
Ripens at different times.
Correct. That's what the Gemara says. A fig tree, and I remember I was a little kid living in Israel. We had a couple of fig trees outside our house. You go up there, and every day, in summer certainly, new figs are ripening. When you go to an apple orchard, they're all ripening at the same time. And an orange tree, they're all ripening at the same time. When you go into a fig tree, every day, their new figs are ripening, constantly ripening. So Gemara says the Torah is compared to a fig tree, because every time you go into Torah, you're going to find something new. There's always something new and innovative in Torah which you didn't know before. You never exhaust it. That's what it's compared to a fig tree. So here, the Torah is telling you that the Torah, the same way that the baby, that's his basic nourishment, the same way the Torah is the basic nourishment of Klal Yisrael. Now look at Pasuk 16. You should put the testimony. You put the testimony into the Aron Kodesh, and the Torah is the testimony, obviously, of everything that's happened since the time of creation. And then take a look at Pasuk Yud Zayin. Ve'asisa kapores zahav tahor. You make the covering of the Aron Kodesh, the covering of the Aron Kodesh, pure gold. Amasayim v'chetzi orka ve'ama v'chetzi rachba. The cover, which I told you yesterday, which is a tefach thick, the Torah does not give us the measure of the thickness, but it covers the top of it. It's 2.5 long by 1.5 wide. And then in Pasuk 18, ve'asisa shnei kruvim zahav, make the 2 kruvim, miksha ta'ase osa mishnei ketzosa kapores. Now the Torah calls it, how does he translate miksha? Hammered out. That means you took a block of gold, you did not make these kruvim, on the previous page you saw the 2 kruvim over there, You don't make the kruvim and then attach them to the top. This is an incredible work of craftsmanship. You're taking a block of gold and an actual intrinsic part of that gold is that you also carve out these kruvim who are actually part of it. They didn't make it and attach it. They're part of the gold. It's all one piece of gold. So they must have started out with a pretty big clump of gold to end up with these kruvim who are sticking up in the air off of the gold. You're talking about the massive piece of gold. What are kruvim? So take a look at Rashi. 4 lines from the top. Kruvim. Says Rashi, Demus Partsuf, 4 lines from the top of 448. Demus Partsuf Tinok Lahem. They've got the face of a child. What do you think of when you think of the face of a child?
Innocence?
There's a certain innocence, certain purity in the child. Certain purity in the child. You see a kid at a certain age. Kids are very pure. Kids are very, very, whether the smaller, the younger they are, they're very pure. Very pure look the kids have. Then they hit a certain age where you can see the Yetzer Hara got in there. Up until that point, when he's 2, when the 2.5-year-old hits the 1-year-old, that's not Yetzer Hara, that's just 2.5-year-old. The person somebody was about 7 or 8. There's certain mischievous look. That's the Yetzer Hara. Where he's up to something. Right? That's the Yetzer Hara. And by the way, it doesn't get any better. It gets worse before it gets better. So only certain people you always wonder, did they have any Yetzer Hara at all? Did they ever have a Yetzer Hara? Certain people, I got a big Yetzer Hara, I bench too fast. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about some people, the Yetzer Hara kind of kicks in. Okay. Now I want you to turn back for a second. Turn back for a second to Bereshis. Perek Gimel Pasuk Chaf Daled. 3:24. 3:24 in Bereshis. It's on page 18. Thank you. Okay? So, Adam Harishon is being chased out of Gan Eden. He's chased out of the Garden of Eden. And if 6 lines from the bottom on page 18, what does the Torah say? Vayishalcheu Hashem Elokim mi Gan Eden. God sends him out of Gan Eden, which, by the way, is 1/60th the size of Gehenna. No, the Gan is 1/60th of Eden, and Eden is 1/60th of Gehenna. I'm just mentioning that. There's Vayishalcheu Hashem Elokim mi Gan Eden la'avod es ha'adam asher lukach misham, to work the earth that he was taken from, and then Vayigoresh es ha'adam, he chases him out. Vayashkein mikedem leGan Eden, he puts at the east of Gan Eden es hakruvim, the guards, the sentries are kruvim, ve'es lahat hacherv hamisapeches, the flaming turning sword, the ever-turning sword, lishmar es derech eitz hachayim, to guard the path to the tree of life. Okay, I'd be lying if I said I know what any of this means, right? All books that you've read about Lord of the Rings notwithstanding, but I haven't read it, but I could just imagine. But, maybe I can't. But take a look at what Rashi says here on Kruvim. He put Kruvim there. Says Rashi, it is the left column of Rashi, right in the middle. 8 lines from the top, left column of Rashi, page 18. What does Rashi say? Es hakruvim. Everybody see that? If you find it, please for the person next to you. Es hakruvim, malachi chavola, destructive angels. What did Rashi say over here? Kruvim, on our page, 4 lines from the top. Demus partsuf tinok lahem. They've got the face of innocent children. Now make up your mind. Are they destructive angels or they're innocent children? Well, there's one very big difference. Where are these kruvim located? They're located right on top of the Aron Kodesh, right on top of Torah. If you raise children and you raise them on Torah with Torah values, so then you're likely to get these innocent, pure-looking children. If you leave them alone in the garden, out in the wild, out without any rules, what are you going to end up with? The same child. What could you end up with? Malachi chavola. You don't have to look very far, gentlemen. Trouble in a cheder in Israel is where a kid refuses to, memorize, go over the Gemara again, right? Or a kid, benches too fast, right? Or he's talking during davening. Unfortunately, in those who are not yet religious, in the state schools, they have metal detectors for knives. They did a survey a few years back. 50% of the kids coming to the secular state schools here in Israel who are not raised on Torah values, they 50% have a weapon. The plastic box cutter knives were their weapon of choice. And 33% of those who carry them said they're carrying it because of self-defense. Right. So see, you don't have to go far. Just look on the bus. Look what they look like. Look what they're dressed like. I got the one kid. He got a haircut like this. I didn't see these little innocent little hater kids. I didn't say they are angels. They're kids at the end of the day. But you see the purity. You see the kedusha. You see where that's coming from. You want it to happen. Then you have to raise it. You have to raise it on. The foundation is Torah. They're on top of Torah. Not only that, you have. Their arms are outstretched, or the wings, whatever, the kruvim, he says, the next pasuk. V'asei kruv echad mikazamina, kruv echad mikazamina, kaporis tasus akruvim al shtei ksosov, right out of the kaporis. They're growing right out of the kaporis. They're growing right out of Torah. V'hayu akruvim, pasuk chaf, pasuk 20. V'hayu akruvim porsei knafayim lamala. They're spreading their wings upwards. Sochachim bekanfeim ala kaporis. Covering over, protecting. They are both reaching upwards, and it creates a protection over the kaporas. Upeneim ishal achiv, facing each other. Stay with us, gentlemen. Ela kaporas upnei akruvim. Torah is telling you three things at one time. Number one, the wings are reaching upwards, which means that yes, we've been raised on Torah, and not only we're raised on Torah, our wings form a protection over Torah. But we're always reaching for more. Never had enough. Always reaching more and more Torah. Number one. Number two, it says, they face each other, but they face the kaporas. Upneim ishal achiv, they face each other, el ha-kaporas upnei akruvim, towards the kaporas. What is the symbolism? Should be pretty straightforward. What is the symbolism of the kruvim facing each other? What does it symbolize when two people are facing each other? Love, unity, friendship, peace. We are always accused of being the intolerant Haredim, and if we would only bridge the gap with the secular, everybody would get along, right? There's nothing more. Places like Or Sameach certainly try to do that, right? Try to bridge the gap with the secular, try to educate the secular. We certainly want peace, and we certainly want to get along. But there are rules to getting along. The Torah is telling you the kruvim face each other, but they face the Aron Kodesh. That means we're willing. We're not only willing, we want. That's our greatest desire is to live in unity. But we've got rules. The rules are they face the kaporas. We face each other, but we're facing the kaporas. The Torah is not ours to negotiate. We can't make deals and compromises if the compromise means that it's going against Torah. You could. If you live without rules, if you're secular, so you don't have any inherent rules. So you could certainly play by our rules. But we don't have, our rules are God-given. Your rules are not God-given. So we can't negotiate them. Do we want peace? Yes, we want peace at all costs, but not at all costs. At all costs, but not at all costs. Because there are certain things we can't do. Okay, if we tolerate certain behavior, certain this or certain that. What they're hawking about now is kashrus reform and conversion reform and all these things. It's not our Torah to reform. It's not our. Rabbi Gottlieb told a story once about a frum guy. Today he's from. He was in a college class. What's it called when you study sociology? The sociology, study people, that sort of thing.
Anthropology. Right?
Anthropology, sociology, wanted some ology or other, right? Some ology or other. So the Jewish kid in the class. So the teacher says he looks around the room. He looks at his list. He says, O'Hara. You're Catholic, aren't you? He says, yeah. Maybe you could tell us take a couple of minutes to tell us about your religion. So he gets up and he starts talking about Catholicism. He looks at all the list. He says, Mohammed, you're Muslim, aren't you? Yeah, tell us something about your religion. Goldstein, you're Jewish, aren't you? Maybe tell us something about your religion. He says, well, I can't. He says, why not? He says, because I'm actually Reformed. The teacher says to him, well, don't you think you ought to know something about your religion before you reform it? How's that for a Musser Schmooze? An unexpected Musser Schmooze. Goldstein today apparently is frum and involved in outreach because of that Musser Schmooze. That's what shook him. Right? Sometimes you get the Musser Schmooze from the strangest places. I knew a frum guy who was in a bar, a club or something. He was playing he was throwing darts. I guess there are dartboards in clubs. He's just throwing darts. He said a lady walked over to him. She said, "You're a religious Jew, aren't you?" He goes, "Yeah." She goes, "What are you doing in a place like this?" Right? How's that for? I mean, she's there. What's she saying about herself? All right, it's a different issue, right? There was two Israeli guys who were somewhere in Scotland. So they stopped by a roadside restaurant. They're sitting in this roadside restaurant eating. They ordered their meal, and not kosher. The proprietor, a guy from Scotland, he comes over them with 2 plates. He puts them down, puts the plate. Says, "Can I ask you guys a question? Do you mean to tell me your people have suffered for 2,000 years just so you could eat the same food we do?" Bon appetit. Right? So you never know where you're gonna get the musser from. So in any event. So how did I get onto that? What was I talking about?
Non-negotiable.
Yeah, non-negotiable, right? And what was I talking about?
Looking at each other and at the art.
Right. That we have our line that we can't compromise. We have a line that we have. The Torah is not ours to compromise. Okay. Now, take a look at the Shulchan. Now, this again, you have to follow the words very, very carefully. Okay, and that's the Kaporos represents all the purity of Torah, the purity of Torah children. Take a look at 448, Pasuk 23. Ve'asisa shulchan atzei shitim, which make the table. Amasayim orko v'amarochbo v'amachetzi kamaso. He's got a picture of the shulchan over here. The shulchan is actually this part in here. This is the shulchan. The shulchan only goes up till here. Everything over here is added on. This is where they put the showbreads. This was not part of the shulchan per se, what you see on the side here. The shulchan is actually very small. But on top of the shulchan, when they took the 12 breads, they put it on these, like, what's it called? A shelving. There was shelving that was put above it, but that shelving is not actually part of the shulchan. Now, you'll notice there, obviously 12 breads correspond to 12 tribes. And the idea of the 12 breads is that bread is basic material need. The person even says, "I'm just trying to earn some bread." Right? When I was growing up, the hippies even used that as an as a slang for money. Hey, you got some bread on you? Right? That was how they referred to money. Get money, bread. You're fighting. We're just trying to make bread for our family. That's what the basic nutrition is. Now, there are 12 of them. And this is one of the reasons why when we eat, you leave bread on the table after when you bench. You do not clear off the whole table. You do not clear the bread off the table. Because there is a concept that when we're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for a bracha, the bracha has to have some sort of receptacle down here. That it has to be, the bracha has to have something tangible that bracha energy could affect and rest on. So the way it worked is they had the 12 showbreads in the Beis Hamikdash. They're called the Lechem Hapanim. They had these 12 breads in the Beis Hamikdash. And these 12 breads, then the bracha came down from Shemaim to the bread and spread out to the 12 tribes of Klal Yisrael. So that the bracha of prosperity has something tangible as a target, as a receptacle for the bracha. If you look, he's got a picture over there on the Lechem Hapanim, the showbread. Now that's one opinion over there, what the showbread looked like. The most basic appearance, what we've always been taught, is the Lechem Hapanim looked basically like this. It was shaped, it was a picture, this is a ball of bread. This is all dough. And imagine it's the same thickness. And it was just like in a U shape, in a square U shape. This is the, come on, stop. Stay, just stay. Come on, be cooperative. This is what the showbread looked like. It's called the lechem haponim, the bread with the face. And the reason it's called the face is because the open side, the exposed side, is the face of the bread. It's called lechem haponim. That's why it's called the lechem haponim. Now, there's an opinion that is shaped like that. There was a family that knew the secret. There was a secret in order to get the bread shaped, right? In order to get it to shape like that. In order to get dough and bake dough so that if the sides are staying up, there was a secret ingredient which they didn't teach anybody. They were worried that they claimed that they didn't teach it to others because they were worried people would use it to offer, when they would bring offerings to idol worship, they didn't want them to use the lechem haponim secrets in order to what do you call it, serve worship for idol worship. And it says that the family that they used to make the Gemara says the family that used to make the lechem haponim, their children never took pure sifted bread. They never ate pure sifted bread, so that nobody should think and cast rumors on them that they're nipping at the lechem haponim. And the family that made the incense, their daughters and their daughter-in-laws, the kalas, when they got married, they did not use any perfume, so that nobody should think that they are nipping at the perfume at the incense from the Beis Hamikdash. And we learned from this an interesting halacha of v'hiyisem nekiyim, that you should have a clean, make sure that what you do is clean and above and beyond suspicion. And there's a pasuk that says v'yisem nekiyim me'Hashem u'miYisrael. You should be beyond reproach. And anything that you do, if somebody sees you doing something that looks a little dodgy, let's say somebody sees you walk into the lunchroom outside of the hours, and you're walking out with a carton of milk. Somebody looks at you, you should just explain to them that I'm bringing this for the program, right? Because if that's considered doing something dodgy or something suspicious looking in the yeshiva, at the end of the day, that's what in our shul, I was once in charge of, in one of the minyanim, there's always somebody who's in charge of emptying out the pushka. Because if you don't, the kids will get to it, right? Because they may be innocent kruvim, but they like candy. So even the pure kruvim like candy. So my job was to empty out the pushkas every day on the way out of davening. I would just take the pushka, empty it out, and to put the money in my pockets. This one day, and then I have a bucket at home, and eventually we get collected. So this one day there was a guest in the shul, and I walked over, I took the pushka on the way out, I emptied it out, put it in. The guest just gave me a look. Now, he's been in a shul also. He also knows in his shul somebody empties out the pushka. But I realized that when he's giving me this look, that, I guess you are. That's what was there. I guess you're the guy. That was what the look was. So what I did after that is I kept a supply of plastic bags in the shul. It was somewhere in the shul. So every morning I would take the plastic bag and pour it into a plastic bag, because that means that you're the guy. If I have a plastic bag, that means you're obviously the guy who's supposed to be emptying out. Then nobody suspects you. That's the difference between suspicion and not, is a plastic bag. There's actually a case once in America, some guy, there's what's it called, where you deposit the money at night? A night depository, where one of the banks had a night deposit thing. Bank is closed. So there's a cop standing there, and there's a sign on the deposit thing, out of order. And the cop is standing there with a big laundry bag. And people come by and say, yeah, it's out of order, you put it in the bag. So people are dropping in the bag. Turned out he wasn't a cop. He was the guy who put the sign on the thing, and he put on a blue uniform and walked off with a laundry bag full of people's cash, right? Which works. Because in life, you don't even suspect, you don't suspect anything. I knew a guy who had his van was stolen. He had a Chevy van here in Israel was stolen because some kid wearing a red vest, which is much too small, came over to him. He went to a chasna. So the kid said, "You want me to park your van?" And he's wearing a red vest. If you wear a red vest, that means you're one of those parking guys, right? Right? Isn't that what I mean? So the guy goes over and he says, "Do you want me to park your van?" He said, "Yeah, sure." So he gave him the keys. He got it, and he drove off. He drove with it. And he had trouble collecting insurance because when they said how to get stolen, he said, "I give somebody the keys," and he drove off with it. He said, "Well, we're not paying for that. Well, shouldn't have given him the keys." And I think it was Seinfeld. Who once said, you get the same guy who has no hesitation to give the key to his $40,000 car to some 17-year-old in a parking lot who he's never met before. Yet when he goes to a gym, he locks off all his smelly clothes and he locks them up. You know, that he locks up. But his car, he'd give it to give his car, this Ferrari, to any 17-year-old with a red vest. That's pretty funny. In any event, so they did not do anything that would cause them suspicion. They did not do, because you have to be beyond reproach. Our behavior has to be beyond reproach. Now, if you'll notice that the description, one more point, the description of the table, it says in Pasuk 24, Vitzipisos zahav tahor should be coated with gold. Ve'asisa lo zer zahav saviv should make a golden crown around the table. Okay, so we'll leave this for next time. We'll do the whole table next time, Ritz Hashem, on Sunday.